Hello, welcome everyone. As everyone's making their way in, we're excited to have you today. Thank you for joining us in this next session on working with governments. Thank you for joining us in this session. We're super excited to have you here. Well, this is a session, three parts to this session. The first part that we had last week on working with governments, and the video is available online, so we will put that in the chat for you if you would like to watch that video. For those of you that are joining us for a second time, we welcome you to this Working with Government session. As we get started, we just wanted to remind you, all of our sessions, we like to have this interactivity and these conversations. So first off, in the chat, we're going to launch a poll quickly, but feel free in the chat to introduce yourself and your organization so that we can get to know the folks that are in the room. The poll question we would like you to ask, we just launched, is what is your experience with working with governments? Have you had a lot of experience working with governments? And so you've worked with them in the past, you've never worked with governments, but you're planning on it. Kind of where are you now? And this is just a way for the speakers to get to know everyone and your background and what you've done in the past. So as we're collecting those answers, thank you for those who have done the poll. And should I go ahead and give it another couple minutes? Thank you for those that are just now joining us. And we're excited to have you here. We'll go ahead and end the poll. It looks like 22% of the people have worked with governments in the past. And working with governments currently, 44%. And those that have never worked with governments, but they're hoping to, is about 33%. So that gives you a little bit of the background of the people in the room at this point, because we always get people coming in a little bit later. Great. So I wanted to introduce you to our wonderful speakers today. I'm going to introduce the moderator for this session, who also has an amazing background as a social entrepreneur. If you haven't met Chitra Hanstad, she is just a wonderful person. We absolutely enjoy having her in the Catalyst team. She comes to us from Landesa. They just moved their family to India, and she's the Senior Philanthropy Officer at Landesa in the Asia markets. But she comes with us with such a great background as Executive Director of World Relief that worked with refugees in Western Washington, and she worked with governments in that capacity there. So she does have some other insights to share as well. But her background is just, she was a philanthropic advisor at the Seattle Foundation. She's worked in nonprofits along the way. She went to this wonderful college called Wheaton College. And if you've ever sat in a room with Chitra, I will say that you feel like you are the most important person in the world, because she is so in tune with who you are and what you want to say and your whole being of who you are. So Chitra, we are so happy that you put together this amazing panel, and thank you for moderating this session. Thanks, Chitra.
Thank you for that incredibly gracious introduction. And I'd like to introduce our other two panelists. The first is Claudio Colantoni, and Claudio, I get the pleasure of working with Claudio at Landesa. He's the Senior Business Development Manager, and he is just an amazing person. And he has a ton of experience, over 30 years of experience as a senior manager in the profit sector for a multinational American company, but he also has specialized in organizational management and program development. He's worked as a country director in extremely volatile environments, which has given him extensive knowledge and experience in security management procedures, security analysis, and other skills. He's worked with the International Medical Corps as the country director of both Sudan and Libya, as well as previous work with Relief International in Jordan, Syria, and Iraq. Now, Yussuf Sane is currently the national coordinator of Tostan in Guinea-Bissau, and he leads Tostan's national strategy through community empowerment, partnerships with up to 120 communities. And he's also the co-lead of the National Program Leadership Team. He has experience in management of human rights education programs and models for sustainable community-led programs. He is a WISE Emerging Leaders Fellow and a FAF Friendship Ambassador. And previous to Tostan, Yussuf worked with the West Africa Civil Society Institute in Ghana, where he supported the knowledge management and capacity development units to facilitate knowledge sharing and enhance performance efficiency. Claudio and Yussuf, we're so thankful that you're both here with us today. And I would like for each of you to give us an overview and an intro to the organizations that you work for. What do you do, and can you set the stage for your work and the context in which you work? So I'll start with Claudio, please.
Thank you, Chitra, and good afternoon, evening. I don't know where the people is in this moment to everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I'm very glad to have the opportunity to talk about this topic, working with government. Unfortunately, as Chitra said, I started more than 30 years ago. And I remember at that time, my first assignment was in an African country where I stayed 3 years, and I never talked with the government. But not because of me, because this was the approach of the social entrepreneurs at that time. Not governmental at the time meant against the government. And I'm very happy to talk about that, because this is an evolution, very, very important evolution in the sector of the social entrepreneurship. I'm currently working for an American organization based in Seattle, which is called Landesa. Landesa is mainly working in the sector of the land rights. The assumption is that the people that in our world are experiencing poverty have basically 3 common factors. They are living in rural areas, and they rely on the agriculture and on the forest as the mean of livelihood to survive, basically. The third factor is that very often they don't have any legal control over the land on which they depend. Now, if the first 2 factors, we cannot do anything else, because you can't decide where you're born, basically. But the third point, the fact that these people, and we are talking about 2 billion people, because around the 27% of the world population has their livelihoods based on agriculture. So what we are doing, we are focusing on the third factor, the fact that they don't have legal control over the land where they live and from which they take their means for livelihood. And we want to support them to find a way to lift themselves from out of poverty. So it looks like a niche, but if you look at this kind of work from a broader perspective, we can understand that land rights, it's a very powerful tool, because they have the power to reduce the poverty, to reduce the conflicts, because we know that poverty is generating conflicts, has the capacity, the power to increase the economic activity, to empower the most vulnerable groups, that are those mainly women, mainly youths, that are suffering of this situation. And at the end of the day, the land rights have the power to secure the livelihood, strengthening the food security of this population. This is very quickly our work. And even if it is focusing mainly on land rights, this kind of work is entailing many cross-cutting approaches. Gender and social inclusion, for instance, because as I said, women and youth are the main beneficiaries of this work, but also climate, because the assumption is that land rights foster a responsible use of the land and can, at the end, protect the land itself. But also there is a component that to me is very interesting, is the corporate engagement. So we are not only supporting the people of the countries where we are working, but also we want even to support companies in doing business in a right way, in a trustworthy way, a transparent business, a socially responsible business, so that the population, the communities they are coming in touch with can be respected. They can have the role that they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudio. Yussuf, could you tell us a little bit about Tostan?
Yes, thank you so much, Chitra. As you said, my name is Yussuf Sane. I work with Tostan, and Tostan is an Africa-based NGO, currently with operations in 5 countries in West Africa, and that's my home country, Guinea-Bissau, the Gambia, Senegal, Guinea, and Mali. Tostan's mission is to empower communities to develop and achieve their vision of the future, and to inspire large-scale movements leading to dignity for all. And we achieve our mission through our main values, which are love, integrity, respect and humility, learning and innovation, sustainability, partnership and dialogue, and passion and pride in our work. We also carry forward our mission mainly through our flagship program, which is the Community Empowerment Program. It's a 3-year empowering education journey, mostly available and done in partnership with rural communities in the geographies where we're working. And through this program, the communities are learning and transferring knowledge into collective action in various areas, very cross-cutting areas, including human rights, democracy, problem solving, hygiene, health, child protection, literacy, project management, and use of new technologies. We've recently launched our strategy, and it's called In Partnership for Community Wellbeing, and it's Tostan's strategy to the year 2030. We're very excited about it, and in this strategy, we're doubling our impact across the continent, and we're focusing on a few countries. We're concentrating in 3 countries, and that's Senegal, Guinea-Bissau, and the Gambia. We are working through affiliates in Guinea and Mali, and we're catalyzing our efforts in Nigeria, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Kenya. And so over the past 30 years, we've really learned about a very important opportunity that's going to guide us to the future. And it's that empowering formal and non-formal education can mitigate poverty, and it can shift deeply entrenched social norms by providing critical information, uncovering aspirations, and supporting new skills development that would enable individuals, especially women and girls, to develop, realize, and sustain their vision for community well-being. We've learned that also another opportunity are the partnerships with key actors in the broader ecosystem, including governments, of course, that contribute to well-being and can amplify community leadership, can amplify impact, drive sustainability, and advance community well-being and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you. I think several people said it, but as you were talking about the values and framing Tostan and its work in light of those values, that was just beautiful. Thank you for that. So we're just going to have a conversation as if we were sitting in my living room here in Bangalore or Claudio's in Italy, but we're just going to have this virtual conversation today. And we're going to be framing it structured around 4 questions. And the first one is how to get started working with governments. The second one is, are there any toolkits or how-tos that they found in their work to be useful? And then third question, can working with governments lead to mindset and behavioral shifts? And finally, are there any risks or obstacles to working with governments? And so we'll get started. Yussuf, I'm going to just ask you, we saw that 33% of the folks that responded to the poll said that they've never worked with governments. So let's say you're a new executive director and you're leading an NGO, you're working on an issue that has political and social ramifications. What would your advice be to get started engaging with the local or national government?
Thank you, Chitra. I'd say Tostan's experience, whether working at community, local, national level, directly with the populations or with government, it's quite special in that we start always with an invitation. And so it's the way we work with governments, it's quite like the way we work with communities. And often when we are entering in partnerships with communities, it's because they have submitted some kind of request for partnership with Tostan. And it's quite the same in the countries where we're operating today, with the exception of Senegal, where Tostan was actually founded. In every other country where Tostan has operated, it has been through an invitation that was formulated by the national government or a key partner that was already working with the national government, such as UNICEF or UNFPA, World Bank. And so these partners invite Tostan to introduce their models. And the experience of Guinea-Bissau, for example, is that a delegation of Bissau Guinean government and civil society had traveled to Senegal to learn about the experience that Tostan has had there over 2 decades. Initially to learn perhaps from what Tostan was doing. And then this, of course, it evolved into an invitation to Tostan to operate and to implement in Guinea-Bissau. So it's very important that these key actors, of course, understand your model. And even if the thematic areas and the topics that are being covered are quite sensitive, if they believe that your approach is respectful, if your approach allows them to also engage, then people will be very much open to invite you to work in their geography. And that's what we've learned from our experience.
So Claudio, as Yussuf's talking, I realized that that's very similar to Landesa as well. So do you have any other advice that you could give to other folks that are just starting out, that 33% in the room today that have never done worked with government?
Yes, thanks, Chitra. Yes, I can just echoing what Yussuf just said, because there are many common traits, even with my experience. There is something that Yussuf said that is absolutely right. They have to understand our model. This is absolutely true, but I believe that when you get started working with governments, we need to consider also that governments are a very complex environment. Now, quite often we have the tendency to consider a government as a monolithic entity, but this is not true. So they have to understand us, but we have to understand them. We need really a deep understanding both of the issues that we would like to help to address, but also about the system in place. I believe that when we start to work with government, unpreparedness is one of our main enemy, because we go there, we propose what we would like to do, but if there isn't a deep understanding of how the government is working, how the system is working, we really risk to waste our time and to lose our capacity to have an impact on that situation. I'll say that, to complement what Yussuf said, that to be prepared and to avoid to avoid any over promise are two key elements to get started working with governments. And this is something that, according to my experience, it's not a matter of what government we are talking about, but it's quite a common trait, regardless if we are talking about African government, European government, or United States government.
I'm just going to add one thing. Thank you, Claudio. That was really good. And you too, Yussuf. When in my last role as ED of World Relief, and we were working with refugee issues during the Trump era, and we had one existential crisis after another. And as a person that for 30 plus years, I've been working in community-based organizations on the ground, very grassroots, and a woman of color, I wasn't convinced we needed to work with governments, honestly. And what I realized is that there are times that if we want to address the symptoms of an issue and we want to work downstream and provide care to people, we can continue doing that. But if we want to address the systems part of that and go upstream and say, why is this problem existing? Then you have to work with governments. And as you said, Claudio, I was totally unprepared. The second week I was there, I had reporters in my office putting, because the refugee ban happened, the Muslim ban happened, and I had reporters in my office, and I had to learn how to go in and brief our Congress people, our governor. By the end of 5 years, I was being called by all of those people asking for my opinion on policy, and we changed so much policy in those 5 years by actually learning how to do that. I had no clue how to work with national or local governments. And I think many of us are just afraid. And I think that's, for me, was the first step, was to say, you know what, I'm not representing just me, I'm representing the community. And if I don't speak up, who will? And yeah, somebody just said the imposter syndrome. Yeah, I had it very big. And so being prepared, doing your homework, and hopefully this session today is going to give you some great ideas of how to get prepared. So the second question that we're going to address is, are there any toolkits, any best practices that you've learned that you can recommend to us in your work, that you've used and utilized in your work. And Claudio, I'll go to you first.
Thank you, Chitra. Well, as Chitra was saying at the beginning, I worked in Somalia, Libya, Sudan, Iraq, not exactly countries where governments are so well structured and functioning. So you will forgive me if my approach is a bit general, but I believe, but there are some traits that to me are more or less valid everywhere. I don't believe that somewhere exists a magic box, a magic toolkit for working with government, because at the end of the day, government are made by persons. And this is something that we need to consider, and the tools can change according to any context where we are working. The first things I would say is that, and this is recall the problem to be prepared, I believe that the first thing is that we need to have really a strategic approach. To me, working with government is a matter of strategy. It's not a matter of tacticism. And from this standpoint, I'm very grateful to my organization that is trying to address the causes of the poverty rather than to fix the specific problem in the specific area. But the importance of a strategy, to me, it's really paramount. And as Chitra said, the other toolkits is that I do believe and I do hope that the time when the social entrepreneurs wanted to fix issues, building parallel structures, is definitely over. I do hope that my approach with local government, I try always to consider what was in place and to improve what was in place rather than to introduce something completely new. I know that sometimes it looks easier and above all faster to go and to do what we have in mind. But this is something that in the medium and in the long term will never work. Regarding the toolkit, but there are some components that cannot be ignored. A strong capacity of negotiation is paramount. And again, negotiation on the strategic aspect, not on the tactical one. The example is not the best one, but it's the example between the battle and the war. We are not there to win a battle. And a negotiation that, if wants to have an higher likelihood of success, must be win-win-win. Win for us, win for the government, and win for the people. Because any of these components has some interest in the good sense that must be respected and must be evaluated. I would like to say other 3 points very quickly. 2 points, because one probably we can talk about that. We need to distinguish when we talk with government between positions and interest. So, I mean, We have a
Elaborate on that. Yeah, what do you mean by that?
when we work, we have a tendency to look at the government interest, to what is official, to what is stated in the governmental strategy. And this is where we are looking at, but actually we are talking to people. So, and we're talking to a person, we're not talking to an entity. Specifically in countries where sometimes Ministry of Agriculture is a label or an empty box, and then you really depend on the people. And again, I'm not talking about, I know that when we are talking about government, we have a tendency to understand the word interest in a bad way. I'm not talking about that. But I believe that we need to analyze the interest of your interlocutors. For instance, in terms of the evaluation of the impact of what we are proposing on their workload, for instance. Again, we are not in front of a monolithic entity. It's something with many sides, where persons, specifically in some countries, have a really a key role. The last thing that I would put in a toolkit is another kind of approach, which I would say is flexibility with integrity. We need to be flexible. We need to adjust, to customize, to tailor what we are proposing to the interest, to the system, but at the same time, we need to have integrity. Probably we can talk more about that later on when we are talking about the risk, but without integrity, to work with governments can be very dangerous, because we risk to water the mission of the organization that we are representing. And
I want you to hold that thought, because we're coming to that question at the end.
And I shut up immediately. I give the floor to you.
No, that was really good. I want you to make that point. Please remember, it's important, but we'll get to that at the end. So Yussuf, I'm going to you now, and I'm going to ask you, hold on one second, I lost my questions. Sorry. So are there any concepts or concrete approaches, experiences that you have found especially helpful in working with governments?
Yeah, just to generalize, I guess, and I'm thinking back to now Claudio's introduction, and I'm seeing that, you know, our generation probably doesn't have the same experience with government. In our experience, we are expected today to somehow include government in everything that we're doing. And others, you know, it's always, and that's sort of been our experience mostly, especially at the local level. And I think that's one important lesson for us, whenever we are working with communities, we make sure that we're working with communities and their government. Because that also ensures sustainability. Of course, we will implement, the communities will learn, and they will lead the process. But they also need the support of other partners, especially in the local government. So what we often do is that whenever we're organizing an activity, and even if it's a monitoring mission, we invite, funny as it sounds, invite the local government to participate in this activity with the community. And we often find that actually they may not be as aware of the realities in the communities as we expected initially. And we've even had in some countries, some areas, local administration who have told us, I've never been to this community. This is my first time visiting this community, and it's a surprise. It's hard to believe. But then we get the sense also of there's a higher sense of responsibility. I think even the people who have said it, after learning about the realities in those communities, felt that, okay, there was much more of a contribution that they could make. So I think in including the government and everything we do at the grassroots, also it makes them more aware and feel more responsible. The second is really to report. I would say report regularly, and this is especially at the ministerial level, and report with government. We have in our experience, for example, if we do visit a community or we participate in an activity with local government, we ensure that we are together with the local government actors presenting this to the national authorities. And that really supports also the national or the ministerial level. It supports on the prioritization. So as much as we can report together, it ensures that on a nationwide scale, people are more informed and they're better able to prioritize in favor of communities. The third is whenever there are exchange opportunities. And one example I would give is, for example, we in partnership with with the communities where we work, there are events that are called public declarations. And often when they're organized, we have delegation from, for example, the Gambia leaving and participating in a public declaration from Guinea-Bissau. It's also important to include the government in these exchange opportunities. This ensures that there's the cross-country learning, but also we're building new connections and new networks across government. And that enables government to learn, government actors to learn from each other in quite a different way.
Thank you so much. And I'll just add quickly, there's several people that are like writing me asking, can we participate in the conversation? We will have time at the end, promise that we'll have some time for that. And I'll just add, in addition, all of the things you said were so great. But I would say, like, get to know who the key decision makers are in your local government, build relationships, because like, as Claudio said, they're people, not just some conglomerate. I found out what people's favorite Starbucks drink was, and I would always take it with me when I'd go to meet with those officials, and that built relationship in a very small way. And then find out what their strategy and goals are, what the government's strategy and goals are, and see if there's alignment with your organization. As Claudio is going to get to, is like not to compromise and do it with integrity. And then finally, as Yussuf said, one of the strongest things that we did was to introduce them to our community, have really great like focus groups set up where they can come and actually just interact, because they don't have that opportunity very often. And many of the folks that, especially in the United States, that hold office have never even really, they've gone to, you know, like Ivy League schools and have lived a pretty charmed life, and they've never really been in the community and talked to people that are struggling. And to have that interaction on a consistent, ongoing basis, we do quarterly events like that, really help them to understand the plight of the people that we were working with. So those are just some of the things that I found to be helpful very quickly. And then, are there any other like resources that you can think of? Oh gosh. Okay. This is great. We're going into our first breakout room, and then we're going to come back to the other two questions. So we'll just hold on, and you'll be sent into a breakout room with one of the speakers. All right. So we'll see you soon.
The question we're going to ask in the breakout room, and we'll remind you in the chat as well, is we will have speakers in the breakout room and some experts in working with governments as well. But we want you to be discussing some of your, what would you like to learn most about working with governments, and what has some of the biggest challenges been so far? If you introduce yourself, you must do it in 20 seconds or less, because that affects our breakout room. So very quickly say hello, but then go into the discussion of what would you most like to learn about working with governments, and what has been your biggest challenge so far. So thank you, and we are opening up the breakout rooms now. You should see on to accept the breakout room right now on your screen. And if you do not have a join the breakout room, just let us know and we will put you in a room. Connie, I have you in a room as well with Valeria. So my challenge, for some reason, I think, Michelle, you're ready to go into one of the breakout rooms. Valeria, you're ready to go in. Johannes, for some reason, you're not listed into my breakout room. So if you can join in, that's great. And great. Our breakout rooms are filling up. Terrence, if you're not able to get into the breakout room, or Yidimo, let me know and I will send you into another room. Sometimes it gets a little flaky about getting you in a room. It's only slightly annoying. Yussuf is pretty popular to get into a breakout room with. Christopher, can you accept on your screen to get into the room? Solomon, same with you. Thank you for joining us. We're thrilled that you're making your way back.
I just want to tell Adams that I will finish what I was telling him by email.
No worries. You can finish. Chitra, you want to go ahead and get some discussions going on from your breakout rooms all?
Sure. I mean, you said that you wanted a couple of people to report back.
Sure.
You still
Yeah,
want to do
that'd
that?
be great.
Okay. So do we have any volunteers for reporting back?
We didn't have the time to nominate the volunteer.
That's true.
Okay. In our group, we use it to take one volunteer to present our work. We did in a few minutes. We have really showcased how the government in a good way. First is how we can involve the government. Can you hear me?
Yep. Mhm.
Yes. How can we involve the government? Either is high officials we can involve government, or the low officials. You start from low officials. So we've seen that the main strategy is that inviting them in your works, like preparing, I can say, a webinar or any kind of the community dissertations to showcase your preferred works, and so they can be involved in the supporting your proposal. Yes, yeah. And another thing we highlighted, we have already showcased is how some government deploy the proposals submitted by the social innovators and use for their own implementation, and they do not involve to the ones who submitted it. But the time was limited, and we didn't get the time to discuss with it. Yeah, maybe you can also point out to that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm looking at the time. Debbie, what time do we end? I just want to make sure.
15 after the hour. So you got time.
Okay,
Mhm.
all right. Anybody else want to share what
But
they?
very briefly, Chitra, I report because we didn't have time to nominate. We focus on two components that are connected. The first one, how we can show to the government that we exist, and how we can be interesting for governments. And the two things, from the first standpoint, I believe that what we say that we need to understand the relationship with the government in a wide way. The government is not an ATM. We cannot go to the government just when you need money or when you need something. The relationship must be much more articulated. And we are interested for the governments, again, repeating what we said before, if we are able to present business model, business plan that are win-win-win, because otherwise we risk that the attention of the government will not be so high. Over. Thank you.
That's a really good point, that it's a mutual relationship, mutually, enriching relationship, that we're not just asking them for something all the time. Yes.
I don't want to put Connie on the spot, but I saw that in our session, she was jotting down a number of things that each of us shared. So if you could share that, I think it would be really valuable so we can get the conversation here and some insights from the speakers, Connie.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So we had people from Nigeria and Kenya and Uganda and Nicaragua and the Southeast Asia, I think, represented among the people in our group. And some of the questions and challenges are the following. So how can we get social entrepreneurs to have a united approach to government was one of them. What are some practical ways to collaborate is kind of adjacent to that. Third one is, how do we fundraise? So once you get the buy-in from the government, but they want you to implement the program, but they don't necessarily have the money to fund you, how do we fundraise? And then how do we integrate into existing programs was a third question. A fourth one was, how do we make research about policy actionable and compelling for governments to take up? So if you conducted research and have some recommendations, how do we make that relevant for governments? And then a couple of more how questions. How do we build trust? And then to Claudio's point, how do we engage governments in our work? So I think he drove down into a little bit some of it by saying, how do we make sure that we exist, and how do we make us interesting? But this general theme of how do we even get started on engaging government was a question from our group. And if I missed anything from our group, please speak up, members of my small group.
I think there was a lady named Irene that popped up on the screen for a second. Irene, do you want to share something?
Thank you. One of the things that came through in terms of our group, I'm Irene Mutumba from Uganda, is basically social entrepreneurs, aligning our priorities to government objectives. And that really means looking at where are the entry points. Are there ways, for example, if it's more strategic, do you have like public-private partnership policies so that there's an entry point? And really that is a catch, in terms of, taking your issue forward. So we talked about that in the group, and that's really what I wanted to share. It is very, very important. And definitely in most cases, we may not really expect financial resources, but the fact that you can actually leverage, the existing structures in the government, and you get the approvals and the endorsements, that can help you, start or scale your idea, but at the same time use the MOUs to fundraise, because then you are looking at a big scaling of the idea. So really, entry points are very key, and expecting more of non-financial resources in terms of supporting our work. That's what I wanted to share.
Thank you so much, Irene. Those are good points. Those are great points. Well, if no one else has anything to share, one of the things that came up in our group, and I'm surprised it didn't come up in every group, is the issue of corruption in governments and how do we deal with that. When Connie, you were saying, is there something united that we can say as social entrepreneurs that we won't pay bribes, for example? Can we all agree on some of these kinds of things? But, you know, living and working in India, I've already, you know, it's just part of the water that we swim in here, and trying to figure out how do you maintain your integrity and all of those things. I think that's huge. People also brought up the whole idea of bureaucracy. How do you raise funding from government sources, and how do you work with government partners to scale? A really good idea, a really good concept to scale it across the state or across the country. So those are the things that came up in ours. All right, so let's, Debbie, if it's okay, we're going to jump back into our conversation and then come back for questions from the audience.
Great.
Is that okay?
Sounds great.
All right. So we'll get back to the questions. And we were going to be talking about, this is a really interesting question, and I didn't want to lose this. Governments, working with governments can lead to mindset shifts and behavioral shifts because of policy changes. And Yussuf, I wanted to start with you. Your organization, Tostan, has effectively used working with local government bodies to shift mindsets and behavior around female genital mutilation. I know that was one of the things that you started with, and now you've expanded to so many more things. But can you share more about what you've learned from that process and how others of us can impact social change through our organizations by working with governments?
Thank you, Chitra. Yeah, working with a social norms lens has really taught us quite a number of lessons about social change in general, and I believe it's lessons that we can transfer even in our partnerships, in our engagements with government. And this is especially about the process and the change that occurs throughout this process. So in working with communities, we see, especially through the Community Empowerment Program, which we have innovated to the government environment, to work in collaboration with government. We've seen that there's always a need for strengthened relations among people, and they should agree on the principles of respect. And these are usually principles that are associated with their values. So the principles of respect, inclusion, and this it makes people motivated to increase the collective well-being. And so this is very important whether we're working with communities, and we see that it equally applies when we're working with government actors. There's also a new awareness by the people involved or the participants of their own potential to promote the well-being and to promote their common vision. There's the understanding, and I'm using this one because we often use human rights as a foundation. And so people gain the understanding that embracing human rights and responsibilities will allow them to contribute better to their deeply held values. And so human rights reinforces existing values. There's also the opportunity which is important, to review existing practices and reframing our roles and responsibilities so that they can better contribute to our collective well-being. And so then people start to share explicitly their commitments to new ways of pursuing that well-being. And then, of course, once they start sharing those commitments, their expectations become greater. And then we introduce skills. So all of this is, these phases are really of the process, really conceptualization and allowing people to commit themselves wholly to the collective well-being of their environment. And this is true whether it's community and whether it's government. And then we introduce, once we have these commitments and these level of engagement, then we introduce new skills so that people can reinforce it, reinforce their commitments through applying new skills. And so, of course, we've seen this at the community level when we're, of course, promoting human rights in general. But we see also with government, this has often led to more government being more transparent, more accountable to the population, and thereby reducing corruption naturally.
Wonderful, thank you. In the interest of time, I really want to give us some time for question and answer. I'm going to skip to the next question because I really wanted to get Claudio to talk about that one point he brought up at the very beginning. Claudio, there's always elements of risk to our organizations when we work with governments, and especially depending on the geography. How do we approach these risks and how do we minimize them?
Yeah, that's a big issue. There is an interesting report of Interaction that is highlighting that for NGOs working in such environment, there are security risks, there are fiduciary risks, there are legal and compliance risks, there are operational, reputational, ethical risk. And I have the feeling, maybe I'm wrong, that actually NGOs are at greater risk than they themselves think they really are. And I believe that a clear risk mitigation strategy, it's really a precondition to work with government. And here we are talking about objective risk. Now that many times they don't depend on the government, they don't depend on the NGOs, they're just happening. But a risk mitigation that sometimes is something that is undervaluated when we implement our activity, but a risk mitigation strategy is a must, I believe. And then there is another component. Before I was saying flexibility with integrity. I'm not scared for a compromise. I'm scared where we set the boundaries for that compromise. The main risk to work with government is that we really water our scope of work. We really water our mission. And this is with local governments because you are stretched, or with the donors government because we need money to implement what we are implementing. So to get this money, we are ready to say yes to everything. I believe that to have some very strong boundaries, it's really something that every organization that wants to work with government must set very, very carefully, because otherwise, okay, we risk to do things, but we risk to realize at the end that we are not anymore those we were supposed to be.
Such a good point. And I think, I don't know, Yussuf, if you have anything to add to it in a couple of minutes so we can give people time, but that I just so strongly agree with that, because I've seen organizations become opportunity driven as opposed to mission driven because of opportunities they see in the government and as a source of funding, they do water down what their mission is, and they'll chase the money instead of chasing their mission. And it's hard to do to keep yourself, as you said, to be flexible, but to maintain your integrity. I really like that. Anything that you'd like to add, Yussuf? One last point before we go to Q&A.
Yeah, due to time, I think I'll just summarize, but it's really about being mindful of the cultural context where we're working. And so meeting the system where it is and you know, working with actors in this system to perhaps co-create a better future. So that we always have to start from a position of respect for what we are finding in whichever environment we wish to work.
I love that word co-create because we often think of governments as being oppositional, but we need to think of them as actually, they can actually leverage our work. They can also be great partners for our work. I know with our work at Landesa, we also go where we're invited, only where we're invited. And because of our work in policy and working behind the scenes to write policy, we've been able to just amplify our impact because of governments, right? So I really believe all NGOs in our sector should, if we're talking about systems change, we have to engage governments. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Debbie, and open it up for Q&A. And you mentioned that Connie and Valeria are here.
Yes.
And maybe they can join Q&A too if people have questions for them.
Great. If there's anything that anyone else has a quick question on, Connie, either you or Valeria, if you want to talk about the working group with working with governments, that would be a great plug.
Are we permitted to ask questions?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Kelechko Kezie from Nigeria. It's been of great concern working with governments because of perception that government is very corrupt, government is very restrictive, perception that government wants to monopolize and capture all the sectors. Oftentimes, working with government, people see you as a civil society, being close to government, they feel that you have compromised. So it becomes a challenge, even at the local level, building trust due to the type of government we have. The government we have is oftentimes monopolistic and dictatorial. So how do you create a niche for yourself, maintaining your integrity, as well as working with government, taking into consideration these issues that I've raised, and taking into cognizance our peculiar environment, where our government is perceived as being corrupt, and those working with government or having close affinity with government is also seen as being corrupt. And now, as a civil society organizations, you are partnering with government. How will the society see you? Thank you very much.
Yussuf, I'm thinking it's you because you probably struggled with that as well. You have to unmute.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's certainly a challenge we face here as well in these parts of West Africa, where working with government can be perceived as engaging in politics. And we make an effort to ensure that, of course, we do have a political neutrality policy in place. We ensure that this policy, of course, is understood by our staff firstly, and we ensure that also that our partner communities understand that, you know, we are willing to collaborate, engage with whichever government is in place. Our interest is the best interest of the partner communities, and so we don't align that to any, you know, political affiliations. As far as, I guess, being perceived as adopting, if we're in association with the government, then perhaps we have adopted the government's practices. I think we're also in a position to be examples of transparency and of accountability. And that's why we put an emphasis often on reporting to government to ensure that we're setting the expectations perhaps for you know, how does this actually look when we put it in practice, and how can government also use this for its engagement with the population which they are accountable to.
Great. And I'm sorry for the time, Solomon, if you could put your question in the chat. I do want to launch our poll. We do a good job of running a poll at the end of these sessions so we can get some feedback from all of you, and it allows us to showcase the work that we're doing. So if you can answer these few questions, that would be lovely. In the meantime, we're also going to give you an update on a couple of events that are coming up. We have a fundraising masterclass series that's coming in, and we're super excited about that opportunity. And that series is going to be offered through the with the Black Fox Philanthropy. The first one is getting ready for the convening spaces of these big events like the Skull World Forum, and Claire Waltham is going to be there as well. That's going to be on April 5th. And then there's building blocks of fundraising, and then how we get everyone, bring your board members, bring your team members, and how everyone in your organization should be a fundraiser. I also want to mention the Ashoka training. That training is available to you of working with governments, and we'll put that in the chat. So if you have not done the working with governments online free training with Ashoka, we'd love for you to be able to attend that one. And lastly, we have 2 book series that are coming up. One of the books is Dream a Dream, that is from the team in India, and then also the 4 workarounds with Paolo Savagent. So I appreciate that you all are here. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Unmute, say goodbye to the speakers, and apologies that we ran over by 2 minutes. Thank you so much. Wonderful job, speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. Ciao.
Ciao, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks, Chat, Claudio, Yussuf. Thank you so much. Thanks, Connie.
Thank you.